So, to begin. Yesterday, Morton began a great day of talks with a history lesson about the split between statistical learning and implicit learning. And he noted that the two sides tended to ask different questions. One side asking what are the kinds of statistical structures that people are likely to learn, and the other side asking what kinds of mechanisms do this learning. And he noted that we needed to bring these questions together because the answer to each question is going to inform and constrain possible answers to the other questions. So what I'm going to do today, coming in a bit from the out in left field, I think, is to add another question to these two. And that question is, what is the structure of the data in the world, in the wild? We need to answer this question if we want our experiments to be relevant. And I think the answer to this question also constrains the answers to the others. What kind of structures are learned and what kind of mechanisms do the learning? But of course, I don't want just any answer. I want a developmental answer. So why do I want a developmental answer, and what do I mean by that? We often think about the learner when we talk about statistical learning as pictured in this image, in a sea of data, surrounded by regularities that need to be learned, as if all the data are just out there, waiting for the learner. But I think this is a fundamentally wrong analogy, and that one makes our task of understanding human learning and the origins of human cognition more difficult. And that's because the regularities in the environment change with development. And they change in systematic ways that are probably a big part of the story. I think this is likely throughout our entire lifespan, but it is certainly true and blatantly true, which is what I'm going to talk about today, in the first 2 years of life. The statistical structures available to infants in all domains, although I'm going to focus on visual statistics mostly, change radically over the first 2 years. And they change radically because infant sensory motor skills and their cognitive abilities and their social abilities change dramatically over those 2 periods. So here's what I want to do today. I want to talk toward, I don't have one, toward building, and what it would mean to build a developmental theory of the environment. And so the talk has 3 parts. First, I want to tell you that there are big changes in the available regularities with development, that the proper analogy is not a sea of data, but maybe a series of data packets. Then I'm going to go in and show you 2 cases of how different periods in development have very different statistics that are probably relevant to the story of how babies break into word learning and how they become rapid word learners. And so the idea here is that the changing psychology of the baby creates really quite different environmental niches, and that understanding the structure in those niches and the effects of their order on learning are what we need a theory of a theory of environments to do. And as Carolyn noted, I'm going to be talking about what I'm spending most of my time on now, which is ecocentric vision. Ecocentric vision is an emerging field of research that is becoming quite well known and done a lot in the field of infant research, in human vision more generally, and it's a burgeoning field in machine vision. It's a study of how visual environments change and the information in visual environments as a function of the perceiver's own actions, locations, body, and posture. And what's interesting about ecocentric vision is that the personal perspective is highly selective. So here we have this baby sitting in the kitchen, and there is a dog, and there is a clock, and there's somebody doing the laundry, and somebody washing the dishes. But at any given moment, the baby only has a partial view of what's in that scene. And so the frequency statistics, the visual statistics depend not on what's in the room. You can't go around and count the objects in people's homes, okay? You've got to know what happens to be in front of the head, okay? Now, all the data I'm going to present are head camera data, and I really don't want to spend too much time on this point, but since some people worry, and since they spent too much time thinking about eye tracking with screens, they have some wrong assumptions. So some people worry that how do we know if we've got a head camera here that we're getting what's in front of the baby's eyes because maybe he's looking over here, okay? Well, the fact of the matter is in the 3D world in which we are engaged, everybody, from little babies all the way up to you, keep your head and eyes aligned. The point of time in which you're looking with your head and eyes not aligned, under like 500 milliseconds. If you're going to attend to anything longer than that, you align your head and eyes. So when you're talking about big amounts of data, lots and lots of images, lots and lots of frames, the content that is prevalent in those frames is the content that is prevalent in front of the eyeballs as well as in front of the head. The top little thing there just shows you gaze distributions. We've done a lot of work on this with head-mounted eye trackers, and they're centered. So if anybody's worried about it, we can talk more. All right, so to move to the first part, there are big changes available in the regularities over the first 2 years, and I'm going to talk about the visual regularities and just use one example to make this first big point. And the data come from what we call the Home View project, and I want to do a call out to the National Science Foundation because they were very brave to fund this. What we're doing is we're building a corpus of developmentally indexed egocentric scenes. At the moment, we have 75 infants, 3 weeks to 24 months of age. The babies wear head cameras. They're embedded in little hats that the parents can put on their head. The parents are supposed to try to get 6 hours in a day. We wanted it all in a day so that try to get everything, not special moments. Parents can't quite do that. If you have infants, you can realize that many of them don't quite pull off the 6 hours in one day. But that's the goal. There's no experimenter's presence when this is done. It is a baby's natural habitat. We record at 30 hertz, and from this we extract the individual images. The kind of visual statistics we're doing, we do low, mid, and high. Today I'm only going to talk about high-level visual statistics. They're all scene statistics. That is, we're not doing videos, okay? We're sampling from the scenes, all right? But, so you get a sense, I'm going to show you some movies. Now, those of you who are developmental psychologists may have seen these movies. That's all right. They're fun. Watch them again, all right? So this is a 4-month-old, and yeah, I do want it muted. Mute, mute, mute. There we go. So that's a 4-month-old. What do 4-month-olds see? They can't do much. They see what's around where they're put, a lot of walls, lights, edges of things, and things that people put in front of their face, okay? And this is a 10-month-old crawler. What do they see? Oh. They see that you need to clean that carpet. They see the table legs. They have a very different view than one that we're used to. We know that this view, I'm not going to talk about this, but we know that the flow dynamics from crawling play a really important role in building motion sensing systems in the brain. This is a very important niche of information gathering. Okay, right here we have a 13-month-old walker. Yeah, my line here is I don't call them toddlers for nothing. Okay, here is the same child sitting. Look at that. So clear, so clean. An object in view, sustained attention. Okay, as we'll talk about, this is a very special property of toddlers. Okay. So what we do in this work is we sample from the images, and we sample usually, generally, and what I'm going to talk about today, at 1/5 hertz. That is a frame every 5 seconds. These just show you a series of frames every 5 seconds. Vision in the real world, visual information in the real world is slow. Okay. In fact, I have a paper I'm preparing called Slow Vision, Fast Words. You can think about it. Okay. The visual world does not change rapidly. Okay. So every 5 seconds is really quite good for the most part. All right. So what are in these scenes? Okay. Well, people. There's a lot of people in these scenes. Okay. This makes sense. We're social animals. Okay? But interestingly, and that's what I'm going to use to make my big point, the nature of infant views of people changes dramatically over the first 2 years. So what I'm showing you here on the y-axis is the proportion of frames with faces. On the x-axis is the age of infants and months. Each dot is a single child. And for these analyses, each child contributed over 3,000 frames sampled from their corpus. And the line is the best fitting line as a function of age with the 95% confidence interval. And what you can see is that early on, under 3 months or so, certainly under 2 months, there are a lot of faces. For these very young babies, that comes down to that proportion of frames with faces, frames or time. It comes down to 15 minutes out of every hour. Okay? For those young babies, 15 minutes out of every hour has a face in front of it. For the babies approaching their first birthday, under 6 minutes an hour for faces in front of them. We also know that for these young babies, only 3 individuals, unique people, count for most of the faces they see. So the blue line shows the frequency of the most frequent individual, let's say mom. The red line shows the joint frequency of the 2 most frequent individuals, let's say mom and dad. And the green line shows the frequency of the 3 most frequent individuals, and because of whom I am, we're going to say mom, dad, and Nana. Okay, right there. All right. And a little diversity comes as you go over that first year, but not so much. Okay. Now here's a really interesting one that if this were talk about faces, I'd have a lot more to say, but I'm going to not say too much more. This is the proportion of faces that are within 2 feet of the camera. And as you can see, those early faces are very close. They're also faces that show both eyes. Okay, they're frontal or near frontal views. This is really good face information. The proximity of faces declines dramatically. Okay. So what do we know? I've told you that the frequency of faces is declining dramatically over the first year, and that the proximity of the faces is declining dramatically. But it's just faces that decline. It's not people. Okay. So if you just code all the body parts, we'll count faces, we'll count knees, we'll count feet, we'll count hands, we'll count elbows. The number of people in view does not change with age. Now this makes sense. Here where this study went up to 24 months as the corpus has been increasing in size. And that makes sense. Nobody in their right mind leaves a toddler alone, okay? They're dangerous, all right? So this is very select information about people. This is a proportion of frames with bodies in them that it is the face, that is the body part showing. A very rapid, very dramatic decline with age, okay? So in the beginning, what you know about people are their faces. And later on, you know something else. And what is that something else? It's not really a shift from faces to knees. It's a shift from faces to hands. So early on, faces dominate babies' visual experiences of people. That's shown in A. And later on, as you approach starting around your first birthday and increasing, it is hands that are the dominant view of people that you see. The bar graph over here just subtracts for each baby the proportion of faces from the proportion of hands, so that you can sort of see how it's shifting from being dominated by the faces of the people around you to the hands of the people around you. And now it's not really hands, okay? That's kind of fibbing, because babies are not seeing hands just hanging next to bodies. What they're seeing are hands on objects. So really these are hands and instrumental acts on objects, okay? 70% of the hands in view across all ages are in contact with an object. All right, so let's think about what this means, okay? So what I'm trying to do here is give an image of what this might mean in terms of the kind of statistics, visual statistics that the baby is operating on. On the y-axis, I have cumulative face hours. That's what the yellow line shows. What I've done is just pretend that all these babies in this study were one baby, and I say, as they're going up with age, if I just add up how many total number of faces have they seen by their first birthday, that's shown in the yellow line. The gray line is the cumulative waking hours, and this is calculated from normative data on how much babies sleep, and it's pretty linear because babies sleep about the same amount of time, doesn't decrease all that much over the first year. And so what you can see is early on here, where I've shown that face up to the 4-month mark, cumulatively, faces are making up a huge amount of their visual experience, okay? That is, if you're asking what stimulus is driving the development of the early visual system, faces have a kind of large component of what visual information is there. Now, by the time you get up to 12 months, your cumulative experience of the visual world now very different, okay? Most of what you're seeing is not faces, it's other stuff, okay? And a lot of that other stuff is hands-on objects. So if you're a visual scientist, this is really, really interesting from a low-level, mid-level to high-level point of view. We know that this is a wiring diagram of the visual system. We know that everything from V1 on up is tuning itself up based on the visual statistics it gets. And this human system gets visual statistics that are dense in faces early. That's tuning everything from the human and weasel to the spatial frequency, okay? Not just the face stuff high up, right? This is what's driving the development of the visual system, and later on it shifts to something else, okay? So the point I want to make is that I think this is an easy example to show, and there's probably lots more interesting or complicated ones, but to make the point that the statistics that learners receive are bundled. The learner doesn't have to sort the world into things that are face-like and things that are hands and instrumental act-like. That comes sorted for them. They have a period of time when they learn about faces and a period of time when they learn about something else. And although there's a lot that we don't know yet, I'm pretty sure that this has major consequences for what is learned and for how it's learned and for how we understand the nature of the learning systems that do this, okay? All right, so now to the second part where I come more close to what matters for word-referent learning, which was the whole origin of why we started this corpus anyway. And I want to talk about the visual pervasiveness of objects and first learned object names. And again, I think that the idea I really put forth here is, again, really toward thinking about how we need a theory of the development of the environment if we're going to understand statistical learning. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to focus in on 8 to 10-month-olds. This is a really pretty interesting age developmentally. 8 to 10-month-olds, a lot is happening. This is right in the middle of that shift from faces to hands. They still got lots of faces, but hands are coming up. They're in the midst of sort of major shifts in motor development, and they're not very good at anything, okay? These are babies who can sit, but who fall over if they go to reach for anything. They certainly manipulate objects and play with them, but not very well. They're not great at putting objects into other objects. If you give them a spoon, they're likely to, hit their forehead. They stand, but they don't walk. They do crawl, okay, typically, okay. And this is also an interesting period because it's ahead of what we traditionally think of as the beginning of word learning. Traditionally, the beginning of word learning has been linked to the utterance of the first word, which happens around 12 months. We now know, though, that these babies, by the time they're 8 to 10 months of age, that they have receptive knowledge of 10, maybe 15 words. We know that, could even be more. We know that from experiments that put pictures of things on screens and say the words, and babies turn and they'll look at the object that's named, showing they have at least some kind of receptive knowledge of object names. Here's the thing, though. The field has absolutely no idea of how they learned those object names. Almost every theory of word learning just skips right over this period. They think about what 2-year-olds know and what 2-year-olds do, or what 3-year-olds know or what 3-year-olds do. But the problem of how we start is really a major problem. The big theoretical problem for learning first words is that those words have to be learned from word-scene correspondences. There's almost no other way in that people can think of. Right? It's got to be that you hear a word while looking at a scene, but those scenes are highly cluttered. They are just filled with stuff. Even if you give them babies all kinds of constraints as to what an object is or what a category is, it's very hard to figure out how they figure out anything, okay? And then, of course, you have no right to give them what an object is or what a category is. Visual object recognition itself in cluttered scenes is not a trivial matter. So, everybody sort of agrees that, babies must learn to learn their first words from hearing a word and then somehow aligning it to a scene. But we've not really studied this problem properly. And again, this is why we went into the whole home view project. We have lots and lots of studies, and you all know about them, on infant speech segmentation, on word segmentation, on the statistics in the language of words and infant-directed speech, just loads and loads of studies on the word side. We know zip on the visual side. We don't know how babies recognize objects, real objects in cluttered scenes. We don't know anything. And we don't know anything about the statistics of those scenes, and so that's what I'm going to tell you. What are the statistics of objects in real-world, everyday scenes for 8 to 10-month-olds? Okay. So again, we're using the home view corpus, and the data that I'm going to tell you about come from 8 infants who've contributed to that corpus, 8 to 10 months of age, and we looked at 147 mealtime scenes. Now, mealtimes is kind of a misnomer, okay? We defined any moment in which there was eating as mealtime. So this paper is under review, and the reviewers, I guess we didn't make this clear, thought that all these babies were stuck in a high chair. These are not people who spent much time with babies. No, they're on the floor, they're in the stroller, they're walking, they're in the car, anytime they're eating, okay? Or anybody's eating, okay? One thing to remember, because I've seen people confused, you see this little foot over here? That's not the baby's foot. You see this kid? That's not the baby. You never see the baby, okay? The baby's got a head camera on. Those are playgroup or siblings, okay? Those are like other people. That's not the baby we're talking about. All right. All right. So how we do this is we have 4 coders, and we ask each coder to list 5 objects. And they're told to use common scenes and, told to use common nouns. But that's just about it. We also excluded body parts in this coding. We do those separately. Because we have 4 coders and each of them's asked to name 5 things in the scene, we have a maximum of potentially 20 unique objects, okay? There's clearly way more objects in these scenes. And we've looked at these data in lots of ways. Criteria for how many people have to say an object's there, checking back to train coders, randomly sampling what's done. And actually the thing that captures the database is just taking what every coder says as a potential name. So in the data I'm going to talk about right now, it's just, I take all 20 of the offered words, okay? The maximum 20 types per image, all right. So here's the basic result that I want to talk about in this. So the coders, out of these 6,000 mealtime scenes, provided nearly 800 unique object categories, okay? That's on the x-axis, those object categories, those nearly 800 object categories that they found in these scenes are ordered by their rank order of frequency in the scenes, okay? On the y-axis is that frequency. So what you can see is most of these 800 objects that are reported in those scenes are uncommon. They're not frequently reported. Lots of different stuff shows up in these scenes, okay? But there are a few things that are very, very frequent across these 147 different meal times that are pervasively present, okay? This is, and there's other interesting things to say about this, if we were to do it in terms of frequency distribution, this is a power law, just exactly what you'd expect for the distribution of objects in the world, okay? We took those 800 categories that the coders found, and then we determined the age of acquisition for the basic level nouns that name those categories. And what we did then is we divided those categories into all the categories, all the objects categories that the coders found into three categories. Those that we're going to call object categories named by first words. First words are words that are normatively in children's receptive vocabulary before 16 months. Okay? We're going to name categories that are named by early words as the early word categories, and those are the ones that are normatively in receptive vocabulary by 30 months. And later words are going to be all the other words, and we go from adult age of acquisition norms. They have a mean of 5.5 years and a range from 3 to 8 years. One thing to note about this, these coders are not saying weird things that kids could not know the names of. These are all, from an adult point of view, the names of things that are common and early learned, okay? Well, what I want you to see is all those really, really, really frequent objects in these scenes, the pink ones. They are all objects that have names that are learned prior to 16 months. All objects whose names are the first words learned by babies. Here's perhaps a better way to look at these results, okay? And this is just mealtime events, so not all the first words are showing up at mealtimes, although all kinds of things show up at mealtimes. But the point to make is that the earliest objects that are pervasively present, okay, all have names with very, very early dawn of language, age of acquisition. Here I just list the top 25 of those object categories that were found. There is nothing particularly notable about these, okay? They're not all foods. Shoes are common, okay? All that's notable about these object categories is that they are pervasive, okay, in these 8 to 10-month-old scenes, and they all have very early learned object names. These are the top 25 words in the next category, words that are typically known by children older than 16 months but younger than 24 months. Okay? There's nothing particularly notable about these words either, okay? Other than that they're not very present in these scenes and that they are normatively learned after 16 months. They're very, very common things. They're just not pervasively present in the lives of 8 to 10-month-olds. If you look at them, even though they're really common things, it sort of makes sense. Nobody gives an 8-month-old popcorn, okay? Or strawberries, for that matter, or pretzels, okay? Although they give them to toddlers. All right. Now, the next question you may ask is, are parents naming these things during these scenes? What about the words? Well, we're in the process of analyzing the transcriptions, and we're not completely done, but I can tell you that they're not naming them much. It is certainly the case that the names of the most frequent objects, such as shoe, are more frequent than names of things that show up less than 1% of the time in these scenes, okay? But overall, parents are not naming much. So if you were to think about parents with a 12-month-old, and when we bring forward the 12-month-old data, which we're also working on, it'll be clear. Parents are naming all the time. That's their job. They name everything. But for 8 to 10-month-olds, they're not naming, okay? Most of the time they're talking to the brother or on the phone, or they're doing all kinds of things. They are not naming these objects. So for example, refrigerator, which is very pervasive, it's one of the top items in this thing. It may never be named in any of these mealtime things, but that object is there. And it's an early learned object name. So here's our hypothesis. Could visual pervasiveness all by itself, without high-frequency naming, support the learning of first object names? I think it's really, really plausible, and that this may be the key to how babies break in and how the problem gets defined in a way that is a tractable one. If all these experiences are increasing the strength of visual object representations so that those objects are well segmented in these visual scenes, that they're likely to be selected, that you can recognize them from different views and images, and that you can remember and thereby aggregate over infrequent naming events to actually build some knowledge of word-scene correspondences, that pervasiveness itself may be the key. And we are currently working on machine vision and word learning models to test that hypothesis that pervasiveness itself is going to support early word learning. The idea here on the model side is that the pervasiveness might be what you might call an unsupervised portion of learning. We're using CNNs, deep learning nets, and that might constitute a kind of pre-learning that is often used in the training of deep learning nets, unsupervised. And then then you can go into more supervised learning, which would be the learning of the object names, and that early learning will have set up the visual system to make the later learning of those object names very easy. So the idea of putting a picture like this is, so here's the individual kinds of scenes that a baby sees. There's nothing special about the first words in these scenes. If you look at individual scenes, all the scenes are cluttered. The little sippy cups here don't stand out particularly. They're amidst in the clutter. But that maybe because there's so many sippy cups amidst all this clutter, that at some point, one of these occasions when they hear the word cup, like to that scene in the center, that's an object that's well segmented, well represented, or perhaps to use Morton's words, well chunked, so that it has something for the word to be linked to. All right. So the idea is that pervasiveness of a few select objects day in and day out may itself solve twice, referential ambiguity. And that all this work may begin before really the main stuff of word learning begins. All right. Now, a point I want to make is that this, I'm going to come back to this later, but this is not, this scene structure is specific to babies this age. And so now I want to move to the third set of data that I want to tell you about thinking about a theory of a developmental theory of the environment. And that's to move up the line a little bit to look at the scene structure for 18-month-old infants. And it's not at all like the 8 to 10-month-old scene structure. And in fact, the scene structure for 18-month-olds seems to be organized in a way to make word learning, at least object name learning, robust and rapid. So this work comes from another project, what we call the multisensory project. Most of this work happens inside the lab, where we have dual head cameras or head-mounted eye trackers, as well as motion sensors, heads, hands, and eyes, multiple room cameras, audio. And in these studies, we asked parents to play with their infants with multiple toys for a total of 6 minutes. We have data from a bunch of different age groups, but I'm going to be talking about 18-month-olds here. And this brings us back to the transition from faces to hands, because this is when hands really play a very big role. From the first experiment in which we put head cameras on babies to look at what their world looked like, we began with 18-month-olds. And what we found was a structure, a dynamic structure in the scene experiences, which is really not like anything we expected, and not like adults, and not like 8 to 10-month-olds. So on the y-axis here, is the size of individual objects in the head camera image. It's really just proportion of pixels, okay? It's just the image size of the object. And of course, the image size is when an object's big, when they're close to you, and when they're not occluded by other things standing between you and the object, okay? On the x-axis is time in seconds. So the blue line is the size of the blue object in play, the green line is the size of the green object in play, the red line is the size of the red object in play. And what you see and what we have seen over and over again, so this is one child, real time. What you see and we have seen over and over again is that babies bring objects into and out of view, and often one object is much, much larger, dominating, completely dominating the view. And we also, these yellow lines indicate when during play parents chose to name that object. Parents often name objects when they are in these moments, not always, but often name objects when they're in these moments of the object being very large in the child's view. We now know, because of the work we're doing now, that this is not just true in the laboratory, it's true in play at home and play in cluttered scenes. So that image up there shows the image size of the doll. If I put all the objects in there and clutter, it's just too many lines, but the doll is getting larger and smaller as the child plays with it, bringing it close to view. And then the naming moments are the kind of middle orange. And they often, again, align with moments in which the object is large, okay? All right, so this raises the question whether these moments in which objects are pulled out and large in view, okay, are optimal moments for learning object names. And here's how we asked that question. We had parents and toddlers come to the laboratory and play, and that's shown in the middle picture, and they played with novel objects that had novel names, and we told the parents, familiarized the parents with those novel names before the play session began. Parents were just told to play with their infants naturally. They were not told that the infants were going to be tested afterwards. We asked them if they were to name the objects to use our names. Okay. Then at the end of the testing period, an experimenter tests the child in a forced alternative choice task for whether they have learned any of those object names during play. Okay. And what we do is then, what we're going to do is, so we have the parents, they play, then we test, and when we test them, we can divide those tested object names into names that were learned by the individual child and names that were not learned by the individual child. And then we can go back in and we can look at the visual properties during the naming moments associated with learned object names and the naming moments associated with not learned object names, okay? And here's the main result, replicated more than once. All right, so let me walk you through this. These are the visual properties for cases, naming events where the child showed that they'd learned the object name at test. These are visual properties for the naming events where the child didn't seem to know the object name at test. On the x-axis here is time. That little blurry thing in the middle, which I don't know why it's blurred, says utterance, okay? And then we're measuring these properties. That's where they named it, and it's utterance because we take the whole utterance. That's a dog. We just take that as the naming event. That's in the middle. And then we're moving out 10 seconds before that naming event, a very long time, and 10 seconds after that naming event, a very long time, okay? And at the very top one, this is the image size, proportion of pixels, okay? You should know that 5% of an image is a lot of object, okay? Big object, okay? So that's proportion of pixels, object size. The blue line is the named object. The red line are the other objects in play, what you might call the competitors for the intended referent, right? And what you can see is that for learned object names, but not for not learned object names, the named target has a significant visual advantage over the competitors in terms of its image size. Okay? The bottom one is overlap with the center. That is, how much is the named object or the competitors in the center, the kid's nose pointed at it, in the center of the head camera image. And you see the same thing is that the blue, the named target, shows an advantage over the competitors in terms of being centered and therefore more distant from than is the case in the unlearned object names. And the other thing to note about this is a very long period of time. These effects are reliable, for 5 to 7 seconds around the naming event, if you add both sides in, okay? This is a slow, okay? Long stability of these advantages. And the experimental studies we're doing are testing the idea that advantage actually, that it really matters, okay? Long stabilization for this early learning of object names, visual stabilization. All right, so what does this tell us? This tells us that babies learn when the referent is visually salient and when it is more salient than competitors for an enduring time. Well, why do these babies' object images have these properties? They have these properties because toddlers use their whole body to attend to objects, okay? They're not like 8 to 10-month-olds, and they're not like us, okay? When they attend to an object, they hold it. They have short arms, okay? Brings it close, okay? They align their heads and eyes, and and aligning their heads and eyes stabilizes the head, stabilizes attention, okay? It is a very effective, in fact, if you build robots, the cheapest way to build a cheap robot that selectively attends is to have a robot that moves its sensors close to the object, because then it doesn't have any distractors. That's basically what these babies are doing. They're using a physical, external approach to get rid of distractors, right? You're interested, get yourself really close to it, because then nothing is in the way, okay? So I won't go over these bits, but we've shown how it relates to head stability, how it relates to holding behavior, how it relates to head and eye alignment. The child's holding behavior is really a big factor in the stabilization of these visual properties. So I'm coming towards the end. People are showing me time. Which I can't see because I'm too short. All right. So in the toddler, visual attention involves the whole sensory motor system. It has a real-time coupling and self-organization of head, eye, and hands. And this is a really nice thing for object name learning. The coordinated focus of head, eyes, hands stabilizes visual attention, and it reduces visual competition, making really clear visual moments for learning object names. And as I noted, these are very different kind of scenes. Okay? You will not see scenes as we see in 16 to 18-month-olds and 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds. They look like we do. They keep their head kind of stable, and they use their eyes, gaze to shift around and select things before they move, but they do not bring objects close to their head in a regular sort of way. And it's not what you see in 8 to 10-month-olds who don't hold objects so well and don't hold them for very long, okay? This is, I think, the visual statistics at 16 and 18 months are really major factor in the rapid learning of object names. So babies get different visual statistics at different points in their life, and they are solving different tasks, different statistical learning tasks at different points in their life. So it's not batch statistics. They're not really in a sea of data. They're getting, here's your face course, here's your Learn to Object Segment course. Here's your Learn Object Names course, okay? It's like a curriculum. It's as if, evolution has prepared a walk, an ordered walk through a set of data, okay, to build these skills. If these ideas are right, and there's a series of statistical learning tasks, then we need to understand how order matters. How doing one thing first, okay? sets the stage for what comes next. So coming back to where Morton began, and this is my last slide, all right? I'll leave you with this idea, because I think that I'm going to be spending most of my time trying to really understand the statistics in the environment, both the visual side, which everybody's ignored, as well as how the words drop down into that. But I think that if the larger theoretical idea about these ordered data sets is correct, then we actually need bunches of experiments as well that start looking, certainly what Morton talked about with the chunking, you chunk one thing and then you might actually change the mechanism. So that how we might be building from ordered statistics different kinds of units over which then statistics are calculated. All right, so thank you, and I need to thank all my collaborators. There's a very big group of people here, and I have to do a special call out to my collaborator Chen Yu, who even on papers which he's not involved in has had a major influence on my thinking and on how I do things. Okay, thank you.